wonder if you or anyone else has figured out which manga I referenced in part 5.
I don't think so. I have a bunch of notes. I don't think I caught that though. I like the. This is a separate topic. I like the eclectic musical taste you have, and
Yeah.
that the story has. Also, that food is a motif, but neither of those answer your question. But I thought the food motif was cool. No, I don't know what manga was
Hmm.
it.
So it's been a while since I wrote it, so I'm a little fuzzy on what I was actually referencing, but I believe it was a mix of Matsuri's introduction from Siren and Kelty's, I think, propensity for crashing her motorcycle as an entrance from Durarara. Though I've only seen a few scenes from the latter, so if I got that wrong or mispronounced her name, I apologize. Um, I actually didn't even. I guess the food motif is unintentional, but the music taste was absolutely very intentional.
Yeah, it had to be, it feels like. And I like I said, how eclectic it is. You could have went with like just harder, more emotional stuff, but then you throw in like Led Zeppelin when the levee breaks, and I was re-listening to that ahead of this, and it certainly feels very fitting a song for the story because it talks about like um how you can't stand forever basically.
Yeah.
Eventually you're going to crack, especially if you're on your own, which
Hmm.
Riley is for a lot of the story until she really does open herself up. As you mentioned, and in the ways she does that, including sharing her fetish off screen or like really relying on Joe. And I mean, the Joe and Riley relationship is really interesting to me because he's absent for a lot of the story, but she's still, after, what is it, like one date and some time spent getting to know him and like some wedgies, is like in love with him, like
Yeah.
in love with him. So they clearly have, I guess, this instant love at first sight kind of chemistry. It's interesting like how quickly some of that comes together, it feels like.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I guess maybe not, maybe one, not everybody will see it this way, but I kind of see it as if for anybody who's ever read or seen The Disastrous Life of Psyche K, um, it's a very, very funny manga slash anime. Um, it's about this high schooler who's born with the basically every single psychic power you can possibly think of, and how it actually messes up his life because
Yeah.
he hates having powers. Um, and so the one character who's like the cliche school idol and everybody worships her. And like the best part about this manga is that it plays so heavily into these tropes, but it like parodies them. And so the that school idol, basically every single person on the planet who sees her, they say they like as soon as they see her, like oof, they like make this sound effect that like they're blown away by her beauty and
Yeah.
they're blessed to be in her
Yeah.
presence, and he doesn't do that, and so she
Yeah.
slowly becomes obsessed with getting him to say that, and then it turns into her being completely in love with him.
Yeah.
um, and there's a lot of fun comedy with that, but
Yeah.
it's I
Nice.
think it kind of mirrors that sort of because she's basically every single time that she has a date with Joe, or she meets up with him, she's left pondering him and trying to figure out him. And so
Yeah.
that does it a lot of the time. If when something sticks in your mind for so long, you almost unintentionally start to love it or really enjoy it.
Sure. Yeah, mere exposure effect, which I think I've talked about to you before. It's the fact like the more we're around something, the more we're gonna like it. Simple as that. It's kind of crazy. So you think if you just keep hanging out with that hot girl, eventually she's gonna start liking you at least a little. You know, at least
Yeah.
move beyond like distaste. So we got
Yeah.
that to look forward to, us dudes.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so really the music, just as a small thing, the music, adding in
Yeah,
music, it was partial. It was like half um, adding to the story and like providing more atmosphere, but also me
Yeah.
just wanting to put my music taste out there and give song recommendations to people.
Yeah, well, you sort of see that in the beginning. Like she has a shirt and she mentions EDM, and like that's the first taste we get that like this is an eclectic musical taste. But then clearly, like you don't hold back with songs and lyrics that very much capture what she's feeling or thinking at any moment. To sort of emphasize emotional, I guess, beats of the story.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's a cool approach.
yeah, yeah, and I that's really been the thing that like has been able to beyond writing has really been able to um, I guess music is such a big part of my life. Like my most of my tattoo sleeve and most of my tattoos really are about music. So
Yeah,
it's the biggest thing in my life. So being able to share that
yeah,
with other people is really nice, especially songs
yeah.
like 3 Years of Winter by Winter Isle. That's a song that it's unknown, like legitimately nobody knows of it, and
Yeah.
it is so insanely good. But anyway,
Yeah. It's crazy because, yeah, you are a musician and you're bringing in that passion. It really does feel like Fortunate Events is you putting your soul and so much of yourself, all your interests, everything. You're like, I'm going to put all in this one story.
not everything,
And
but a lot of the big stuff. Like
yeah,
no
what are you holding back though? What
Magic the
secrets do you
Gathering.
have that you're not putting in? Oh, yeah.
I,
Why no magic? Were
be,
you not playing it back then?
no, I was. I mean, it's in a
Yeah.
different story, but it
Okay, okay.
just didn't. I don't know. It's didn't quite make sense to put in, I guess.
Yeah.
And
So
reading,
most
reading.
of who you
I don't
are
really
is in
have any
there.
reading in the story either,
Mm.
or making music.
Except for English. English is like the class they're in, and
The like the
they
most
don't
basic
do
thing,
any real learning. It's just like they're in English, which is like
right?
that's set up for every rom com ever. That they're in an English class, because then they can quote like, and they can argue if it's like a meet cute. They can talk about a random book that everybody knows but no one likes,
Right.
in real life. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
I'm talking about like the after book series, for example, in movies. It's
Right.
kind of weird. They meet and it's like, yo, why is it always English class? But it's because the usually the writers of these books are like, oh, I want to show how smart I am and
Yeah.
write about English and the books that they're reading and show how smart. It's like, no, don't do it. Have them meet in like computer heuristics or something like that's interesting to me.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So I'm curious if you picked up on this. I could easily pick up on when I'd actually figured out the story's identity and where I wanted to take it with the
Mm.
introduction of Riley's parents.
Interesting. That happens kind of late too, right?
Part
Kind
7.
of midway. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah.
That's where the story really takes a turn.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
because we get Jen's mind for the first time, and we get some of
First
that
and
like
only.
inner turmoil with her,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But also Jen like helping Riley overcome trauma that we hadn't really seen manifested. Like after the attempted rape, she's kinda it seems like she's kinda okay, like she's just going about other stuff. She's
Yeah.
like hanging out with Joe and it doesn't really come up. But in chapter 7 we see like she doesn't want to go to like a party is like around that point. She doesn't like want to go out until Jen helps her out of like the slump, which is interesting. And we see like obviously the family stuff coming up. It becomes like this story about overcoming trauma in an
Yeah.
interesting way. Yeah.
And I think that is very truthful. I don't think there's anything I don't think I wrote that part poorly at all. So the
Of
part you're
course. Yeah. Of course.
that was part 8, by the way, where
Yeah.
it goes into Jen's head. But
Yes. Thank you.
I think
Yes.
that's something that happens to a lot of people, is that something super traumatic happens and it takes a while to process. So
Yeah.
you might not even recognize that it's affecting you, or it might not
Sure.
quite affect you yet. But
Yeah.
it's just a matter of time
Totally.
before it does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I realized that I wanted to provide an answer to the question of whether we should allow the past to determine the present and future or not, like in teacher-student bonding by magni poles, and the
Mm.
question of how much negativity a person is willing to experience before they give up, as fucked up as it sounds.
Yeah.
Because really, like that's something that I've been wondering for the longest time of myself. How much negativity I can have in my mind before it, because I don't, it's we've gone into that to a decent degree. So, but
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's hard because there's always that limit, but we don't know what it is, and I don't think we can ever know and answer that question because we'll say, "Oh, I can take more of this," or "I can't take any more," but it turns out our capacity to tackle pain and hurt is in some ways almost limitless, but it also feels non-existent.
yeah,
So it's interesting to see Riley like go through these almost mood swings and this moments where she can deal with more and even at the ending where it feels like I'm going to be okay, but like she's probably gonna feel again sadness and
mm-hmm,
loneliness, and she's gonna probably still miss Joe immensely and things as we go, so it's not like everything's okay the end. um but I like how you do try to address that and explore this question of like the limits of pain and
right,
how much we can feel
yeah,
before we are broken,
mm-hmm,
or if we already are broken, and what we do to get rid of that pain.
yeah,
And there's many things we do. And Riley, it seems to be, even from the beginning, is these one-off, one-night stand relationships or toxic relationships because maybe she feels like she doesn't deserve anything better until she meets Joe, maybe. And that's why she's
yeah,
so quick, even after she kicks it off with Joe, to instantly get with Rob.
mm-hmm,
Like after one meeting and like an accidental wedgie, so to speak.
yeah,
So it's interesting for sure.
yeah, and especially like dealing with it on your own.
Yeah,
That's really because that's what I did for the longest time. That's
yeah,
even more so than just how much can you take, how much can you take on your own with no support system.
yes, yes.
So
Well
yeah,
said.
it really was me putting my demons
Yes.
on the page.
Yeah, they are crazy. Those demons. They talk
Yes,
to us, and it
yes,
sucks. It
yes.
sucks.
So along with the previous the continuity error I brought up before, I found a different one in part 7. And so Riley tells Jen in part 7 that Joe is the first guy she's seen in a couple months, when only around a week and a half has passed since the beginning of the story, and Riley told
Yeah,
Jen she broke up with Sean a week ago during their coffee meetup.
yeah.
But like with the previous continuity error, it took me almost no time to come up with an answer for it. So Riley is mixing info up in her head because she's deep in her spiral at this point, but it hasn't quite physically manifested just yet, and she's subconsciously started closing herself off from the people she cares about. So she's more guarded with personal info, even towards her best friend. And it's also such a small detail that Jen doesn't bother correcting her because she's picking up on Riley's mental state, so she knows it's not even worth mentioning.
All right.
Yeah. Um, actually, there was a third one kind of that I thought about, where Riley doesn't realize that Joe is going to the same classroom as her originally. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sort of answered in the same way that the first one is, she's so familiar with the campus that she registers the information on her schedule, but then the actual information is out and she just knows where to go.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I guess just as a little evidence of this being the case, Jen, knowing Riley usually skips the first couple days of a new semester, she doesn't really care. So between part 7 and 8, I can see a very tenuous through line, but reading both feels like it changed to a different story before coming back to the original somewhat. And I feel like I should have
Mm-hmm.
added more in between those parts to flesh out Riley's spiral into depression. But that was my initial reaction. And then thinking on it, there are very indirect details that allude to her spiral, as well as to Riley bringing herself out of it with the help of those around her. I guess as I analyze and really think about my first story more, I kind of see it in a better light. It's tough to say how I actually feel about part 8 because I think it's one of the most well-written parts of the story, yet at the same time doesn't quite feel like it fits here. And I think that's just a product of not enough happening between the two for it to make sense fully.
Okay. Yeah, I get that because yeah, some of these questions I'm asking, it feels like you're hitting on it, like these things I'd love to have seen more of,
Yeah.
and it feels like you said, you're actively already digging into some of that in future projects. And so of course, and you're right not to be hard on yourself because yeah, your first story ever, you've done other writing, but not wedgie stories before, and they are, as you know from doing them now, a totally different beast with different requirements and objectives.
Oh yeah.
And they obviously have to have wedgies. And it's funny reading through this again, the conversations we were just having recently about like the difference between wedgie stories and stories with wedgies. Fortunate Events is certainly a story with wedgies in
Yes.
it, and like despite Riley's like fetish and how they are quite frequent, it's still a story with wedgies in it, and you're deliberate in that, and you do an amazing job with that.
Thank you.
And I think that's wonderful. So I'm glad you're not too hard on yourself reading through it and seeing ways to improve. I feel like that's how we grow as writers,
Yes.
and I know you're gonna take all of that and what you're seeing and the things you said, like a more fleshed out Rob, or more just like filling in some of these gaps where like as a read through you go, yeah, it doesn't like this, it doesn't ruin the story, obviously it's still a fun story, but where you could like you could beef it up, where
Right.
you could add to it and just make it better.
Yeah. Where there's some detail lacking. I think a big
For
part of it is just having spaced it out so long that like
Yeah,
in
of
between
course.
writing it that I was just like, yeah, I just want to write this part. I'm just gonna do it,
Yeah.
and it kind of makes sense. So fuck it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
totally.
I
I know how
definitely
that goes.
in the future, I definitely, at least for the next one, the next long form story I do want to try and write it out fully before putting it out, just
Yeah.
to really try and get through everything in one go,
Yeah.
and not really
Were
miss
you like
anything.
rereading it over the years as you came back to it again
Never,
and again? You're just like, I got it in my head. I
never.
go
It
from
was
here,
it was always I just
Yeah.
always had the ideas in my head.
Yeah.
I am glad I was able to work in a reference to my all time favorite story. My all time
I
favorite wedgie
saw
story
that. Yeah,
is
as I was rereading it, I got a kick out of that
yeah.
chapter 10, right? With the Lucy and Daniela
Yeah.
reference.
And
That was very fun.
there was actually a reference to the fake story that Auntie Cherry had Jen read in Luckily Unlucky about the town
Uh,
wedgie girl where all this shit
I
happens and
was gonna
Riley
ask you, yeah. I was gonna ask you what story that was because I saw. Wow, so that's a very meta reference.
yeah.
That's very deep. I love it. That's great. I saw that and I was like, what story is he talking about? Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's very fun.
Yeah.
Wow, very nice.
Yeah, so I took a page out of your book instead of referencing Auntie Cherry.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we got to reference Auntie Cherry. He's the best.
So, a question in detail I'd never thought about before, but that came to mind when I got to Riley speaking to her mom in part 10 is how Riley is paying to go to Emory University, a very
Mm.
prestigious school, when her dad is a degenerate gambler and 2022 tuition is estimated at just under $80,000 per school year.
Yeah.
It's probably as simple as she got a full ride scholarship from the school or somewhere, but I never thought about that aspect of her background. Yeah,
Yeah.
it feels like one of
Clearly, the
those.
school was just a setting to like bring the
Yes,
characters together, right? In the beginning,
absolutely.
because I when I briefly looking up Emery and I was like checking some stuff, and I saw, yeah, for like a year or something. It was like 20K or something insane. You U.S. people in your universities are just bonkers.
That's per semester,
Um,
actually.
yeah, it's insane. Like that's
Yeah.
absolutely bonkers. I didn't really think like, oh, I wonder how she affords that. But you're right. Yeah, when her father isn't even in the picture, it's like just her mom and her. So yeah, I guess she'd have to get a scholarship there. But we
Mm-hmm.
don't get like much about her past or except for obviously the very significant details about Thomas and Maria and their falling out and these key memories that she has. But like we also don't know like Jen's backstory or
Yeah.
like a lot. There's like these interesting spaces that's like we can I guess fill in as readers or potentially we get in future Nefertora stories. Like this is fortunate events we could see as like here's a taste of the universe,
Yeah.
a taste of like the writer I'm becoming. Here's me growing and learning, and now you get the deeper dives into these characters and who they are and what made them who they are and where they're going
Mm-hmm.
potentially. At least that's my dream. I'll have a whole
Yeah.
collection, a library of stories that I can read just by you. That would be awesome.
Slowly growing. Yeah.
Yes.
So that detail, I guess it feels like one of those things that isn't really ever brought up in the story itself, but the creator knows and it informs how they write. And that just goes to show how little I plan an outline before writing.
Mm, yeah.
um, yeah, like there's all kinds of background details that aren't really ever brought up in stories, but they like like actors preparing for their roles. Um, they come up with all these backstories and they flesh out the character fully. They figure out who the character is, but they don't bring it up unless the show unless the show brings it up. But it informs
Yeah.
their performance and it helps them uh, portray the character as a real person. Um, so I think I need to do more of that.
Sure.
Something. So actually, before I say that, the so Emory is actually it was no mistake that I picked Emory. It wasn't just a coincidence. That was the
Okay.
university, that was the college I wanted to go to the most because I don't know anymore. I don't know if it still does, but for the longest time, it had the best English program of any college in America. Um,
Yeah.
and I've been wanting to write since I was in third grade. So it just made sense. But now I don't really care about going to school for it. I just do it on my
Yeah.
own.
Sure.
So something really insanely minuscule that I don't think anyone could ever guess in a million years is the shit painting in Joe's house is actually my favorite painting of all time, and it was done
Wow.
by Mary O'Rourke. I can't
Okay.
find the picture. I can't find a picture of it online. I know I have it somewhere, so if I find it, I'll take a picture of it and I'll put it in here in the podcast. But
Yeah.
it's something about it is just so well done.
Yeah.
And so
Nice. That's a
now,
cool little detail.
yeah, there's all I add tiny little things of myself all over the place in it.
Nice.
And so
Nice.
for the probably the hairiest uh, portion of this absolute two-parter, maybe three-parter, um, I have Joe recall times where he was 9 and 12. And
Yeah.
while the context around it, I think warrants a younger age, I'm definitely not going to try to justify having or even referencing underage characters. I wouldn't have done it anywhere else, but here it felt like the natural way for the story to go. Plus, long before this point, I had realized I wanted to tell an actual story, not just jack off content. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem with that is when you try to marry it with things we find sexual, then it's not really okay to do anymore. But
Yeah.
at the same time, if you're just telling a story, I don't know. It's not a
Yeah.
gray area. And at the same time, I see the tiniest bit of gray in this specific instance. And so I know I've railed against underage content time and again, and I will continue to do so, and I stand by it. I just don't have a definitive answer here in this when Joe is telling his backstory, whether it's okay or not. And that probably makes me a hypocrite. How do you feel about it?
I mean, yeah, it's hard. If you look at this as one long story document, a fetishist is reading through, they're going to be getting off to Joe giving wedgies, and all of a sudden they're going to see Joe as a young kid. And in a way, because the story is porn, even though we have elevated ideas of it and goals for the piece, and we say, oh, but it's not just about jerking off. The fact is, our intentions don't really matter when we're writing it for an audience of wedgie fetishists. We're
Exactly.
gonna jerk off to it, and they're gonna see the kid, and they're gonna, and they might not be getting off to it. 99% probably aren't getting off to it. Probably 99.9% of wedgie fetishists aren't gonna be getting off to it. And if they're not turned off or kind of alarmed to see a kid in a story, since many of us have been programmed to not like that in any form as readers whatsoever, it's obviously just problematic in that complicated sense of like this is porn content and now there's kids in it,
Yeah.
and that's not good. Obviously we've talked about this at length. Like, it's troubling, like, because what if you want to tell a story and you want to capture these important key things when they're
Exactly.
younger? You can't do that, or is there a way to do it? Is it okay even to take an approach of like when they were younger, and we don't say how young they were? It's not an easy thing to do. So I'm glad you're so open in addressing it, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it might be a step in the right direction of being able to do it, but it's I'm absolutely not the exception to the rule of no underage content. So you can vilify me just as much as anybody else for it.
Sure.
So I guess my notes aren't quite in the order I wanted to do, but what do you think I could have done better?
That's tough. I think we've hit on it, like just the concerns I had. Like, I really would have loved to see more of Rob, and it feels like there are some of those gaps in like the events we move from, like, and you have reasons for it obviously, and I'm not critiquing you or like why didn't you do this better. Like, I would have loved to see maybe her sort of start feeling, Riley that is, start feeling the trauma a bit more. I mean, it's hard to critique because 6.5 years you're writing this, you're not like rereading it, having this like this intense, like, I must make sure I'm continuing it exactly. Like, I have these scenes in my head, I'm gonna write them, which is a totally valid approach, and you create an awesome story for it. I feel like everything you've already hit on is just stuff for you to take into the next story, like
Yeah.
more well-rounded details to a character like Rob whenever you write them. Like, not just making him one thing. Like, it's interesting how you point out that he's your anger, because anger is just a shield.
Yes.
Anger isn't a real emotion.
No.
Interestingly, it's always hiding
Mm-hmm.
something else. And it's kind of a profound revelation when you understand that, because then you see, oh, this person's mad, but what are they really?
Exactly.
Rob is probably hurt and scared, but why? And stuff like that. Exploring that more. Exploring Jen as a character more in her backstory. I mean, do you want this to become like she has a subplot she's dealing with? Probably not. Probably not necessary. She's okay as the fun friend who helps Riley through things and doesn't have much to her, and that's okay. Because it's Riley's story, and you don't want to muddy it up also with like, here's every character has a detailed 800-page backstory or whatever, and four arcs and character twists or whatever. Like, it's not necessary, obviously. Um, but maybe more there, and just and keeping, as you said, like, when it sounds like this is your plan anyway, so I'm not saying anything different from what you've hinted at, but just keeping like that consistent, like not tone, but I guess narrative thread all the way
Mm-hmm.
through. Because as you said, the story finds its voice, so to speak, and you find your voice. It feels like a good almost halfway through the story, which is
Yeah.
fascinating. But as you're working through stories in the future, I'm sure that's going to be different. And you
Hmm.
might be taking them like, I know how it's going to go from the beginning and how it's going to remain the same sort of thing. Or maybe you're always going to take this interesting approach where, like, halfway through the story, that's when we all know what it's about. And that would be cool. That would be your voice. And I'm kind of curious for you, like, do you feel like, and I kind of asked this already, but just as a writer, do you feel like you changed from the beginning parts of this? Like not just the surface stuff of like, oh yeah, I got better at
Right.
writing, quote unquote, but like as a writer, like the things you were focused on, or I guess some of that stuff of the way you'd write sentences, word choice. I guess I don't care as much about that stuff because
Right.
that's always going to change, even from day to day. Or you read or you hear something and you try to be more like that and sound more like it without plagiarizing. But like, did you change as a writer? Do you think through this?
I think the question you're trying to ask is rather than did my style change, is did my voice change? So
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
for people who don't know, the difference between the two is style is really the surface level sentence structure, the words you use, that kind of thing, and voice is the ideas you present, what you're trying to convey, that sort of thing. And so it's really a superficial understanding versus a legitimate understanding of the writer. Um, and so I really figured out my writing voice in this community. I already know my style and voice outside of the community because it is extremely different types of writing. Um, but in the community, I figured that out, and so I know what kind of story I want to tell. I want to tell very deep and present issues that people have, and answer these very nebulous and abstract questions. Um,
Mm,
I want to actually write things with substance and meaning that make you question yourself, like a movie should,
mm.
rather than just, hey, it's a good story. I enjoyed reading it. I had a really good nut from it, and that's it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I actually did come up with a couple different things than I've already spoken on. The most obvious one is that I should have taken years less time to write it. But Jen really is the thing that stood out most to me for this question, though. I really don't know how else I could have included her. Maybe I could have given her more screen time during the party, but I'm not sure. Really, the biggest area with Jen where I believe I fell short is her sexual discovery in part 8 and then complete
Mm,
drop of the idea. Yeah, it became
sure.
a complete center focus of that part and still is something I'm really proud of writing, but because of the gravity of the situations that happened to Riley and the fact that it's Riley's story, I think it's a little more excusable, but not by much. I mean, readers can imagine how she's exploring this new side of her sexuality on her own, but I think I feel like, I don't know how I would have done it, but I feel like there should have been more of her exploring her sexuality.
Yeah.
The It's kind
Yeah.
of funny. I've always felt I didn't do nearly enough to live up to the opening line. Like I hadn't earned the right to use such an attention-grabbing opener. Yeah, as I read through it though, the sexual encounters Riley has actually do happen pretty rapidly. So perhaps I should be a little lighter on myself for that. I mean, what do you think? Did I do that opener justice? And really, why do you love that opening line so much? That's really the question I want to hear the answer to the most.
Sure. Yeah. I love the opening because it's really hooky and grabby. Like it's funny because as the story goes, we see she doesn't really have an endless sexual energy. She's not like obsessed or addicted to sex. Um to some unhealthy degree, for example. But when we first read that, we get a really interesting picture of Riley, and we think about how a lot of other stories start, or even just how other chapters of the story start. Some of them are a bit more familiar. Like you have a chapter that starts like another fight, something like a fight
Mm-hmm.
leads to another fight or something like that, and like and they're good and they're interesting starts, but just the idea of endless sexual energy and what that says about a person, and like especially the time I was reading this, I probably felt that about myself, having a lot of that energy to drive me to write, and just to need to exercise it generally as a sort of horny younger fetishist. So as I said, Riley has always really resonated with me, more than any other character in the story. Although interestingly, things like Rob's lack of control and Joe, like just the way he carries himself, it's like you wonder, like if all together, if you put all, even Jen, her bravery and her, I guess, helpfulness as a person, like if you put them all together, the four of them, would you get like a perfect or close to perfect human being? Are they like, do they need each other to get closer?
Mm-hmm.
And it's Rob who pushes away other people, who doesn't get to meet Jen, for example, who's sort of lacking that. But it's Joe who sort of gets to meet Jen, and it's fun when we learn Jen later on was like giving a lot of wedgies, like, and she was a big bully, and she hung Riley up. Like
Yeah.
that comes out of nowhere. You're just like, whoa, like Jen's got this whole like past her as a bully that
Yeah.
comes right at the end. Basically, you're like, wow, that's funny. No,
Yeah.
but I love that beginning to it. It's interesting that certainly you shift away from it, but as we've established, like there is this like seismic shift in you as a writer and a person over 6.5 years, where you have the story in your head but you're not going back to it, you're just looking to continue it with different ideas you still have, so it might not be the most like fluid, but you get this connective tissue. And I like how Riley isn't just endless sexual energy. I think that's an interesting point. Like you start it like Riley's one thing, or she can be described as one thing, but at the end we see her and she's not thinking sexually. She's staring out at the sunset. She's just okay with being okay, and it's like this whole thing. This, as I keep mentioning, trying to fill this void within herself. This whole with the sex, because she has this endless sexual energy that's maybe also creating a whole kind of too. It's like that's gone now, and she's kind of free
Mm-hmm.
because she's okay with being alone and being all right, and she has herself, and she has a better friend in Jen since she's opened up to her, and she's grown as a person who's kind of overcome, in the last couple chapters, her past with her dad a little bit, and her feelings for him that she's sort of addressing as they rapidly come up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Actually, that's something I never, in all the time I've tried to consider why it stuck with. I had never thought of like you would relate to it. Actually, that's
Totally.
why that's super interesting to me. I love that. Yeah. I guess when you describe it that way, it kind of reminds me of the beginning of Sadistic.
Sure. Yeah, I like that comparison. Yeah, and there's funny because some stories will start. Sadistic's a great example. They start like that, or even one like those that early chapter in Blood Money, where it becomes very clear the character is, just like a sadist and enjoys like, getting pleasure off of other people's pain, or just how we get these little descriptions of characters, whether they're very cold like Blood Money, or sadistic where they're this perfect specimen of a human being, and they like wedgies and have a deep understanding of who they are. Like we thankfully don't get that in Fortunate Events. We get a few words, and just the combination of it. It's like this euphony. This euphony is really interesting. Like just to hear it, and this combination where you're like, this is really interesting. I want to know more about this person. Because certainly when I'm younger reading this, 2016, I'm like, does this mean there's going to be constant wedgies all the time? And you quickly like flip that on its head too, and you're like, no, there's
Yeah.
going to be some of them, but it's not going to be constant. She's got deeper problems, and this endless sexual energy is a part of her trauma and how she processes it, but also a product of it, and a fascinating like binary. and we are gonna see her kind of deal with it. It's gonna get her in trouble, like with Rob, but and she's gonna in the end be a different person than who we meet. And I
Yeah.
think that's all we want from a story. Ideally, that's all we need. Obviously, to just for the sake of this, like there's stories where a person doesn't change, and those are fascinating and interesting too. But I love in Fortunate Events that we really do see Riley go through a change and become a different person by the end.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I did bring up. I was sort of thinking how I critiqued Two Worlds, um, and like how the it was set over a semester, and so
Yeah,
they don't really change that much. Um,
yeah.
I'm curious if you think the the character arcs for the characters were earned, especially given the time frame that they had to be.
Yeah, that's a tricky question because, like I said, with Joe, and I hinted at this a bit, it feels kind of quick, and you explained in great detail why they get together so quickly, Joe and Riley. After not having a ton of time together, we don't see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of scenes with them getting to know each other. Even the beginning scene where there's an opportunity for dialogue, we move through it very rapidly, and we go. They talked about their pasts. Obviously, I don't think they talked much about their pasts, or they would have gotten into a lot of the dark shit that they have. Clearly, I assume, cover kind of surfacey level stuff in that
Yeah.
conversation, but we don't know. You don't tell us what exactly they talked about in any great detail, and we see some moments with them together. But like so like that I read through it again and I'm like, man, I would love to see even more of them just together and spending time and dating
Mm-hmm.
and like it becomes hard because obviously Joe's like kind of getting pulled in the Yakuza direction and this is not and it seemed you were very deliberate about not making this the Yakuza story. Like you kept all of that incredibly separate from this. So like Riley, and if you've only read this story, you probably have very little idea about what he's doing except for the Sayo scenes when she comes in. Um, but like if we saw more of what he actually did for the Yakuza, and the thing with Joe is like it in a way, I wonder if you would argue or agree with the idea that maybe he doesn't change all that much and that's maybe for a reason because this story isn't being told yet. Like this is Riley's story, so there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason he's stuck in the past and he's going to change, but that's in the sequel, if
Right.
you even want to call that a sequel. Um, but Riley, I like I would have loved more of her in general, seeing more of the trauma, how she tries to deal with it. Maybe she reconnects with her mother more. I mean, I don't think she ever does. She reach out to her mother or father like
Never.
about the rape, or they're not at the court, right, or anything. Because the
Yeah.
way you did one of the flashbacks, I read it at first like, oh, was this a scene that happened, and she's getting comfort from them. And you realize no, this is like a past memory. So like maybe if we saw some of that, like her dad appears as like a ghost. So I wasn't sure if like her dad was dead. Like
Yeah.
I said, so more of that I would have loved to see. It's certainly hard though. Like like and there's and so I'm not knocking you. Obviously, you know I love
Right.
it. But 6.5 years, not going through it in great detail, thinking, okay, what exactly do I have to keep right after all these years? Like, you're not doing that. You're filling in these gaps as you're going. So obviously, it's your first wedgie story. If it was perfect, you would be some kind of god. But that also wouldn't be any fun, right? If it
Yeah.
was
No, I'm
perfect, you
I'm
can't learn
definitely
from that.
definitely no
You
Quentin
can't
Tarantino.
grow. Yeah. Yeah, what was his first? His first was
Reservoir
Reservoir
Dogs.
Dogs,
Yeah.
right? And that is an awesome, awesome movie. It's really good. But it's not Pulp Fiction, you know? And if he hadn't done Reservoir Dogs, wouldn't have Pulp Fiction,
Pulp Fiction is
which
all
is,
right.
I think,
Honestly, I
considered his
don't think it's
best.
that
Or
great.
Yeah, I'm not. It's not my favorite, but then he has like Inglorious Bastards and
Yeah.
then Hateful Eight, which people love, and some of
Mm-hmm.
those really good ones. I wasn't a fan of his most recent one, the Once Upon a Time or whatever,
Once Upon a Time in
in
Hollywood. Yeah.
Hollywood. Yeah, which is okay. It was cool stars in it, but I mean, so even if Quentin Tarantino can miss me, I'm gonna screw up in stories. I'm gonna write stuff. I
Yeah.
have this story that I wrote years ago. I'm trying to go through it and it's brutal. Like it's huge paragraphs of blah 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 nonsense.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I'm struggling because I want to just post this and get it out. It was supposed to be interactive, but I scrapped that because I just want to post this thing. But I don't know how much of it I just need to cut because it's blah blah
Well,
blah blah blah.
well, I can
And I
if
don't think anybody wants to read that.
I can help you with that if
Maybe
you're
I just
interested.
send it to you.
Yeah.
You fix it. I don't look at it ever again, and then I post it,
Yeah.
and then that's it. Maybe that's what I need.
That'd
So
be
I
fine with
mean,
me.
we're all gonna learn from it. So I hope you're not like, oh, Hans is insulting me, because
No,
I
I'm
do
not.
have that reputation of like people ask me to edit their stuff, and then they never ask me to edit it again, because I can be
Really?
kind of hard and brutal at times. Because I hold
Hmm.
back. I'm like,
Yeah.
why is
Me
this? Why is
too.
that?
Me too.
But I appreciate you letting me talk so openly about this and then share
Mm-hmm.
my thoughts. So I hope
Absolutely.
in the sequels that we get, hopefully very soon, hopefully before Christmas, because Christmas is coming. I'd like a present.
It's
You
not
have new
happening.
chapters. Oh, well, don't tell me that. You could let me live with the hope. But I'll pretend you didn't say that. It'd be cool.
uh, okay. Um, I mean, once I have two more of the things I could have done better, and then if you'd like to go through the the ending, um, so I can maybe clear up some confusion on your end, and possibly for other
Okay,
people as well. Um,
sure.
Actually, I'm glad for that though. But anyway, so like I said earlier, the transition from part 7 to 8 was pretty rough and abrupt. It felt like a complete tonal shift without warning. But I think there's some things that make it work. Um, I did it better in the finale, but the multiple time jumps really are just a product of either not knowing how to bridge the gap between two ideas I had, so I got lazy and relied on time skips, having no motivation to write, and being dissatisfied with myself for it, so just skipping those lengths of time, or both. Um, so yeah, that's there's a lot I could have done better, but those are the ones that really I felt worth bringing up.
Yeah, I love that you're so self-aware and able to note these things because that is how we grow. And it's so easy for me, as you know, to be like, yeah, story's done. I'm not gonna think about it except to think, oh, it was good. But I
Yeah,
mean, if I had the strength to go through and go, okay, here's where I can actually improve and think more actively about that, I'd certainly be a better writer for it. So.
yeah,
I think those who can do it, like yourself included, like we said, it shows you do have this immense strength, and I wonder if that's from wrestling with your demons for so long. You've built up like this strength and these muscles, where you're like you're more tolerant of the pain. I guess. Do you feel that way? You feel like you're stronger now, like having written this
absolutely.
and having just grown up.
I don't think, maybe to a very small degree, writing it, but I think more so the writing is just me being able to express those ideas because over time I got better at dealing with my demons. Um,
Yeah.
I'm I wonder if do you remember way back the first time we ever actually spoke in in the Wedgie Talk episode. Um, I talked on this actually.
Yeah.
The I'm aware of what I'm good at. Not everything.
Yeah.
But I a lot of the time I don't know what I'm bad at. And so I want to that's what I want to hear. I want the feedback. I want to hear what I can improve on. And
Yeah.
so just constantly wanting to get better and looking for ways to do that. It just helped. That's really what helped me develop, I guess, these muscles, as you called it.
Yeah.
It it's I think it's extremely important to be able to not just critique and analyze other stories, but do it to your own work, um, and not just look at it and be like, "Damn, this is shit. This is terrible," but legitimately break it down and look at like where did you go? Where could you have done better? Where did you do really well?
Yeah.
Um, and then take that with you to the next thing.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. So I definitely started getting way more abstract and stylistic with my writing towards the end, like the dream Riley has.
Yes.
So yeah, so this the finale, that dream where she dissolves. That is a dream. And
Yeah.
so Thomas, uh, being a ghost, sort of, he's not dead. It's
Yeah.
Riley's. It's how she sees him, um,
Okay.
and him fading in and out is the external, um, depiction, visualization of Riley's heart closing and opening to him.
Okay.
And so
Interesting. Pretty
she's,
beautiful.
yeah, so she's, that whole thing is really her finally coming to terms and forgiving her dad in her own
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
forgiving her dad in her heart. And so
Hmm.
she can then finally move on from that trauma and be ready for in case Thomas ever does seek her out and apologize for it.
Yeah.
I'm glad
And I
that's
wonder if he will.
I'm
Spoiler alert. Maybe he will.
maybe he will, maybe he won't.
Maybe he will.
It's not
He'll
something I will
appear out of
discount.
nowhere.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm glad at least in one aspect of this I was able to fool people or at least confuse people. So that's fun. Um, I mean, was there anything else that was confusing about it in any way?
Oh, not confusing. I don't even. Yeah, confusing is not even the right word for that. It was this interesting thing where I was like she's seeing him, and I was curious, just like what was the status of Thomas, because that and her mother, you leave it very open, and we
Yeah,
don't know. So I
yeah.
was curious, like
Okay.
what that was meant to signify. So
Yeah,
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 I appreciate you digging in and revealing
yeah.
the secrets of the story.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it would be a lot clearer if it was a movie or a TV show. You'd actually be able to figure it out. But writing is a lot harder to get across these abstract things.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
you're
So
right.
neither of her parents are dead. Um,
Yeah,
she's just kind of estranged from both of them to differing degrees.
interesting. Yeah,
And for Thomas, it's very easy to understand why, but for Mariah, it's not so easy to understand.
yeah, interesting. What did Mariah do? Another story called Unfortunate Events. A prequel. Dun dun dun. Brought to you by
uh,
Hans and the Futura.
well, no, that one would be wedgie events or underwear events, as you call it.
Yeah, underwear events. Yeah, it would be all wedgies every chapter.
Yeah. So do
It would be Jen's wedgie sexual adventure into the community. It'd be great.
do you have a favorite aspect of this story, like a character, part, section, or etc., or does anything stick out to you?
Yeah, it's the ending, like I hinted at. So the best part is Riley, the whole story, trying to fill these holes, and in the end, she's satisfied with being alone. Like it's profound, it's deep, it's such a powerful and emotional revelation for any human being to come to, and the fact she's able to get to this place after Joe has left her, after she's dealt with some of the past trauma, reopening her heart and changing who she is and realizing she's not going to be able to fill these spaces within herself with things like sex with strangers, which she knew, but now she knows, and there's a big distinction between that. Um, I think that's certainly my favorite part of the story. So I'm glad you finished and you got to that
Yeah.
part, because if not, I would have had to say like I like the endless sexual energy Riley had. We would be having a super, and we had a super different conversation, right? Back when we chatted,
Yeah.
before the story was done, and I said I want you to continue this, and I said you better continue it or I'll find you. And then you continued it. You believed my threats, and I'm glad for that, and I'm glad my tough love worked. So yeah, no, I love that ending, and I love the art you got for it too. It does
Yeah, me
capture
too.
really beautifully by ISArt, great
Yes.
artist.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
awesome.
Shout out to ISArt. He's wonderful, super fast. Highly, highly, highly recommend him for anybody looking for art. Very reasonable prices, super fast. Like I got
Yeah,
3 pieces done by him in the amount of time it took me to get one piece from another artist. So
that's amazing.
yeah, it's nice. Um,
Yeah,
I actually found a lot to really love. So if you'll
good,
bear with me
good.
here,
Yeah,
a line that really stands out to me is from part 4. He might be ready for sex, but she was ready for wedgies. I don't remember writing
yeah,
that line at all, but I like seeing
yeah,
myself try to be clever, and it's very
yeah.
reminiscent of your writing voice. It definitely reads like
Totally.
something you would have written, and like the
Yeah,
ideas you like to put into stories.
yeah,
Another line that
yeah,
stood out to me is from the finale. The music of their bodies fell apart. I love that line, and I absolutely was indulging my poetic side when I wrote that for the finale.
yeah,
One of my favorite aspects is how I started experimenting with, as we said, incorporating my music taste into my writing. And I pretty much
yeah.
instantly fell in love with doing that. And so I added it to my repertoire of writing tools. So, by extension, I'm not sure if I can decide between the way I did it for part 8 or 10 on which I like better. For everyone out there, each song I put in Fortunate Events is one I truly love, and there might be a prize for the first person to correctly guess every song I use, including the classical music.
Nice, 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 nice. Amazing.
If anybody can actually legitimately figure out every single song, then I think I'll write a story for you.
Nice.
So good
Do it.
luck.
Competition is on.
Good luck.
Go do it.
You're
Nice.
included. If you want to, that's for everybody. So if you want to try and figure it out, Hans, you're welcome to. But I
Love
don't
it.
think anybody
Awesome.
can because most of it is very obvious. I just say this to the name of it, but there's a couple of them that
Yeah.
are I don't think you'd ever get.
Nice.
I really can't pin down one thing as my favorite thing from it. The further I got into reading it, the more I was really enjoying what I produced. I absolutely 1,000% got insanely better at writing actual people as opposed to my normal writing outside of the community where it's poetry and high fantasy with no humans, just a ton of
Mm.
different kinds of creatures. The only time I've written actual people that I can recall is this flash fiction story I wrote for a creative writing class I took in college. It's about a small group of guys who jack a fancy car and crash, killing themselves trying to escape the cops. Um,
Ah, jeez.
if I can ever find that, I will definitely post it because I really really like it. And for anyone who doesn't know, flash fiction is an extremely short story, usually based around a very small word or character count, and it still has character and plot development. So like this one was a 300 word story, and so
Mm.
there have been contests. I think you did a 500 word story.
Yeah,
Someone did
I've
one.
done some short
Yeah.
ones. Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
it's honestly harder to write that and still have a good story.
yeah. You get to realize as a writer, my favorite part of that is realizing what's important to you as a writer, what you're
Yes.
still including.
Yes.
Obviously, you're forced to do editing, For me, it's like, oh, I have an excuse. I need to edit because I'm like, it's 5,000 words, and it's, oh,
Yeah.
500. I have to really trim it down.
Yeah.
But you quickly realize what is important. What do you include in the first draft when you really think about it? You're like, oh, that's the kind of language I'd use. And challenges like that force you to think about it and think differently. I think are essential, and it's great. And some people hate
Absolutely.
that stuff. They hate constraints, and they think they're stupid. And so when I've done stuff like that for challenges, or I've done like the lipogram where I every word has to include the letter E, people think it's like the dumbest thing ever. Like, why'd you do that? I'm like, cause I want to see what patterns I've fallen into, what
Yeah.
habits I've made, how I can break them, and really write something totally different and force
Mm-hmm.
myself to. So I'm not
Exactly.
repeating the same
Yes.
language. And when I write something super short, what am I going to include and what do I learn about myself? So I'm
Yeah.
always going to love stuff like that. I
Yeah.
think it's
It
so awesome.
makes you a better writer. Absolutely.
Totally.
Um, and it sort
Totally.
of gives you a window into what it's like to be a TV show editor. Yeah, you
Mm,
really have to figure out what actually matters to the story. You
yeah.
can't have extreme. You can't have any fat whatsoever. It has to be back to back meat. It can't be any
Yeah.
fat whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because like you obviously will have a time constraint
Mm-hmm.
generally in TV, and if you're a good writer, you're gonna make sure every detail you have matters
Yeah.
and is significant. So you think about like a Breaking Bad, which I know you watched, and like you could watch a scene near like the end where Walt finds a broken table and he starts like putting papers under it and he's fixing this table, and you're like, why is this guy in a show about being a drug kingpin fixing a table? And you realize like how significant it is. Like everything has to be perfect. It has to
Yeah.
be the way he wants it. If
Mm-hmm.
he sees something wrong, he's gonna make it his way. And just this way of telling us and showing us
Yeah.
who he is without having a character come up like,
Yeah.
oh, what, you're always gonna fix stuff and do
Oh.
things. You're like, it's such a fascinating thing, and it's certainly a challenge. You're right in anything if you're trying to tell or show, which you should be doing, and you've talked so much about indirect detail, trying to
Mm-hmm.
show something. The challenges of how do you do that without overwriting, and that's something I've
Yeah.
only recently started thinking about more and more. This idea that you could overwrite and you could just keep adding detail where you don't need it, or keep trying to over explain something. And obviously the rule is less is more, but trying to figure out like how little is enough, and that's
Yeah.
something when I was a younger writer, obviously I was like, I have to put as much as humanly possible. I have to keep writing because somewhere in all that is going to be some quality and something that sticks out. But as I'm growing older as a writer, it's like trying to keep it tighter, and that's why I'm struggling so much. Like I said, with this super long, it's like more than 30 pages now, this like supposed to be interactive story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like a lot blah blah blah, and I'm looking, I'm like, where can I tighten this? Like I see what I was going for, this younger me of years back, but like, can I, if I wanna and if I need to have these ideas, which maybe I don't, how do I really sum them up in a way that's kind of
Yeah.
unique and interesting? And it's hard. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting to hear
I
you talk about some of that with your stories.
definitely send that story. I would love to help you work
I'll
on
send
that.
it to you. I'll
Yeah.
send it to you, and if you just want to fix it and say it's fixed, and I post it, and I'll never look at it again,
Well,
and I won't learn anything from that experience, but it'll be
oh,
out there.
don't worry. If you send it to me, I'm gonna force you to be part of the process. So I'm,
Oh,
because
that's
I've gotten very good at at editing and that kind of thing. So
yeah.
I, if you're looking to get better at it, then I definitely want to give you some tips and help you figure out your way there. Um,
Hmm.
with the Breaking Bad thing, it's kind of interesting. Even uh, perhaps the arguably the goofiest episode, the Fly, whatever that one's called.
Yes.
That
Yeah,
I
the
think
fly.
I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
epitomizes what you were talking about
Certainly.
with Walt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a polarizing episode. It's either people's favorite episode or they think it's stupid.
I thought it was
First
all
time
right.
I saw
I thought it
that,
was fine.
I hated it, and I went, "Why is a stupid episode in here? I want to see Gus Fring being a badass." And I watched it a second time, and I got it, and I went, "I
Yeah.
understand.
Mhm.
This is about how obsessive he is."
Yes.
And obviously, what I didn't get the first time is it's not about the Fly
No.
at all.
Nope.
He's dealing with all this family stuff. The Fly is like just coincidental to
Yes. It's
all of
what the
it.
fly
It's
represents.
and so like the fact he's going to such lengths that he's doing all this stuff, it sums up the entire series basically. That
Yeah.
episode, directed by Ryan Johnson, interestingly, before his fame with The Last Jedi and Knives Out and those movies, which is
Okay.
fun to think about too.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, it's really crazy
Yeah.
to think they would take the show in such a different direction for that episode. And as writers, it's like, what can we learn from stuff like that? From everything we
Exactly.
read or see, obviously. But like when we think about the different directions we can take stories, I suppose the lesson is don't be afraid to take chances and try something very different, like bringing your story into a courtroom. Unfortunate events, you have to do that, but it's an interesting choice that
Mhm.
does do some very interesting things. So
Yeah.
it was very cool.
Really, the closest I can think to writing actual people outside of wedgie stories is like the characters in my high fantasy are
Hmm.
something akin to the X-Men, but not really. Yeah, kind of human, but they're like they have this weird gene, but it's not really the X-Men either. Like that's kind of the closest I can
Oh,
think. Um,
yeah,
and Riley's parents felt more and more like actual people each time they were brought in, especially so in Part 10. That's something like even such minor characters like that, I really loved that I was able to make them feel like real people in the end.
yeah. That's the goal. That's the key. I'm
Yeah,
glad you felt that way. Definitely.
yeah. So I know I said I can't pin down just one as my favorite thing from this story, but the dream sequence Riley has, it legitimately makes me emotional, which is
Yeah,
insane to
it was
me
great.
because I've never actually been affected by what I've produced, whether that's
Yeah,
stories, poetry, music, whatever creative outlet I have. It's nothing I've ever produced has actually emotionally affected me. Yeah, I cried while I was writing it because it's
wow.
such an
Yeah,
intensely personal aspect of my life, but it's in a different form. It's not exactly that, but the
yeah.
essence, the idea behind it, that is, it's so personal to me. Um,
What, like like this reconciliation, this reconnection with like people we've lost, sort of thing. Like
being
that's what's
able,
personal to you.
being able to forgive people
Yeah. Wow.
without
That's deep.
not without being a, even if you're unable to speak to them and
Yeah.
forgive them in person, being
Yeah.
able to forgive them in your mind and in your heart.
Yeah.
That
That is
is,
so deep. Yeah.
it's
That's beautiful.
it's something everybody needs to learn because otherwise we
Yeah.
carry resentment with us through our lives and it affects us
Yeah.
whether we're aware of it or not. And so it's a very tough thing to do, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it takes
Absolutely.
it takes a very high level of emotional maturity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it really wrecked me too, that scene. It was really, really powerful to see her open up. I would have loved more Thomas in the story. Other moments where you realize she really doesn't like him, or it has a lot of hatred towards him. We have that beautiful moment where she's saying she loves her dad. Um, so it is a beautiful scene though in the end. I love it. It
Yeah.
really did wreck me.
Hmm.
So I'm glad we got it. If nothing else, we had that beautiful, beautiful moment in the story. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. So, what are your thoughts on Jen and Joe in general?
Jen and Joe in general. Yeah, Jen I like. Joe, same thing. They were cool characters. When you reread it, you're like, wow, Joe really is this alpha Chad male dude who's perfect. Feel like Nufatora wishes he was this guy. I know I wish I was Joe in the Yakuza, living it up
Yeah.
with all the perks, quote unquote, as he calls them.
Yeah.
Um, I just straight up 100%, like I keep saying, I would have loved just more
Yeah.
of the two of them in some forms. As you said, we do beautifully get Jen's internal mind for a little bit. I'd love to see more of her, but she really does play the role she has awesomely. She gets to really support Riley and be a great friend to her, which
Hmm.
is wonderful. Um, and then Joe as this great wish fulfillment, self insert slash I want to insert myself and be him in this story sort of thing. He's great. Again, I just want to see more of him, and I'm glad I have that to look forward to in the
Yeah.
sequel, where I get to see his past and hopefully his future, and hopefully he gets in some gun battles or something. Yakuza gets to be the big boss.
Yeah.
That'd
Well,
be
so
nice.
the thing with Yakuza that I've learned is actually they almost never use guns because
Wow.
Japan is so strict against it, and it's also so messy that they'd
Mm.
rather deal with things with their fists. Um,
Cool. So he gets to beat up people with his
yeah,
fists. Some brass knuckles, maybe,
yeah,
or something.
yeah, yeah. So I'll be very biased. I think they're both great characters. I just wish I'd done more with
Yeah.
Jen.
Yeah, of
So
course. Yeah.
perhaps I'll have to write a one-off about her or something at some
That'd
point.
be awesome. Yeah. You could do that as my Christmas gift. Call it the Jen Chronicles, Chapter 1 of 74.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's a lot of chapters. Get writing.
Yeah. So what do you think about their
Wouldn't it be
relationship?
fun though if her and Jen had like her Jen and Joe had a moment? Like Joe's like in the Yakuza gang, they're all like about to beat him up. And then Jen like comes into like the warehouse and she's like, "Oh honey, you're this thing's over here. You gotta come." And she gets him out of like the scrape or something, just randomly, and then they have like a cute little
Maybe.
moment,
I
That'd be
haven't
fun.
I haven't thought about this the I all the ideas yet for for the dangerous games they played. So
Yeah.
they can
It'd be
replay if I
fun if
thought.
like it's like it's kind of like a TV episode. Like the way I picture it's a bit cliche. Like she's tagging along with him. She doesn't know what he's getting into. He ends up getting into some scrapes, and she's like doing her own thing separately, kind of like I don't know, like trying to hit on some guys who are turning her down. But in the end, she really saves him from getting like totally beat up or something just by
Yeah.
being Jen. Something
Yeah.
like that would be fun. It'd be very comedic. It wouldn't really fit
Yeah.
the tones of what you've done ever before, but some Jen and Joe, they might be
Yeah.
cool.
What do you think about their relationships to Riley? Is Jen a good best friend and Joe a good partner?
I think Jen definitely is a good friend. She comes through for her from day one to in the end. She's there for her through all these like dramatic scenes and is helping her get back on her feet. And is clearly trusted enough to be told about the fetish and things. So I think she's great. Joe, like I said, it feels like he's absent a lot, and other than sort of being portrayed as this alpha male of a dude who's awesome and perfect. It's like I want to know more about him. Like he's so perfect, he gets to be in the yakuza at his young age, and he gets to like not even just be in the yakuza, he gets to kind of lead the yakuza with a relationship with the very hot female leader of the yakuza. Um, I wonder how common female leaders of the Yakuza are outside of stories and manga where they're like always the leader and
Yeah.
very violent and brutal and stuff. So yeah, I would have loved to see just more of him in the story, more of him in a relationship with Riley, definitely.
Yeah.
But as he is, he's clearly the best of all of her options. Everybody else is abusive and sucks. Joe's not like that.
Yeah.
He's clearly he cares about her and he wants to be a better person for her. It feels like, which I can respect.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, when I'm as sort of a side note, I sort of keep in mind the manga Sun Ken Rock by Boichi. The dynamic between Ken and the name of the female lead is slipping my mind, but their dynamic is sort of what I've kept in mind for Joe and Sayo. So
Yeah.
that's I'd highly, highly, highly recommend that manga. It's the art is
Okay.
the best I've seen in any manga ever. It's so good,
Wow.
and just the storyline is fantastic, and oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Like
Nice.
the art almost looks like somebody took a picture of shit. It's amazing. Um,
Nice.
I think Jen is a very good friend, but not a good best friend
Okay.
because of the times she's there for Riley, like after Rob's attack and practically forcing Riley out of her spiral, which might not be the best way to tackle a state of mind like that, but it does work for
Hmm.
certain people. Like I've seen
It
it work
worked
for
for
people.
Riley. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a fictional character, and I think I've seen that like forcing people to go out of their current comfort zone. I've seen that work, so it can happen. I see Riley and Jen more as best friends out of circumstance rather than legit best friends because
Yeah.
the only time they're shown or really mentioned to just hang out is the end. And I've always kept in the back of my mind that they sort of stuck together because they didn't know anyone else at school and enough time had passed knowing each other that it just felt natural for them to consider each other best friends. And
Yeah.
Jen does come to her aid all the time, but it happens after the fact so much more than if she comes in while it's happening.
Yeah.
And Joe
Cool.
obviously is not a good partner with how often he skips out on Riley, though the reason for
Yeah.
that, if you haven't already figured it
Yeah.
out from the super subtle hints I placed that I thought were super subtle, will be revealed in time fully, but yeah, he's part of the Yakuza.
Yeah.
Um, Currently, the full extent of that is still classified info, and I don't have the security clearance to release it at the moment, but it'll come
Mm,
in time.
nice.
Is there anything you wish had happened but didn't, or anything you thought would happen and then something else did?
Mm, I'm glad it was finished. I'm glad it changed into the story it became and wasn't just a series of like her getting wedgies. I'm glad like I wasn't sure back when she gets almost raped where the story would go, if it would address that trauma, if we would see the consequences of that. So I'm glad it did. I think more than a lot. I'm really glad you didn't shy away from showing that impact it had and the effect it would have on her psyche and her behavior and what she thinks and feels for a while until she gets closure. And even after the closure, we can assume it's still going to haunt her into the future. So I'm glad you didn't shy away from any of that. Definitely. Um, would have been cool if we see Joe's Yakuza activities maybe a bit more. Maybe. I mean, it really is Riley's story, and I like that we don't take the focus away from her for more than a little bit at any time. Um, maybe more of Jen too, because like you pointed out very aptly, we really get a deep dive into her brain in chapter 8, and then she becomes the best friend again.
Yeah.
Would have been interesting to see if Riley helps her and becomes a good friend to her in turn, the way Jen supported her, if she sort of helps her figure out her sexual identity and maybe the reason she's been struggling so much with men and hasn't been able to get into a relationship, maybe she's into women, maybe that's her surprise and twist, or not, maybe she just needs some help from Riley. Like Riley's obviously tells her what dudes to avoid, which is pretty much everyone except Joe it becomes, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see her maybe play a more friend role to Jen
Yeah.
as well, who's going through stuff. Like I said, it's always Riley's story, always about her as the focus. It's not muddied by a lot of other stuff. So maybe in the future, when we get Jen's sexual adventures in Tokyo. We get to see Riley help her out a bit.
Yeah. Um. Shit. There was something there that you said. Um. Hmm. You said something that I wanted to elaborate on. Oh, yeah. I kind of didn't want to. I kind of wanted to avoid having Riley help Jen explore her newfound sexual interests
Yeah,
as much as possible because I felt like it would just be me copying what Auntie Cherry did
yeah,
already and luckily unlucky.
sure. Yeah, good
So,
point.
but I feel like I should have done something more with it. Yeah. So now to the singular segment on this show, Which Earth segment. You know the question. So would you like me to describe the Earths again for you, or we can just dive right into it?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Yes.
I wonder if it's. I mean, yeah, you might have a better sense of this than I do. I was going back and forth a bit. It feels realistic in a lot of ways. From in the beginning, especially when you list a bunch of real places and you go out of your way to set it in the real world with the restaurant, which I assume was made up, the Rise and Dine. I assume
Yeah.
that was a fake name. Turns out those are real in America, I guess. Because I saw you made a note like I don't own any part of the, and you listed like five things like Emory University. I was like, oh, I guess those are legit.
Mm-hmm.
Rise and Die and stuff like that. Like I said, the brand of shoes Joe is wearing, Nike Air Max 95s or something incredibly specific like that. Um, then there's stuff that again is handled really well, like the attempted rape. It gets a little foggier of like would Joe instantly give her that wedgie without consent, etc. But would he just with regard like pushing that part of it aside, would he instantly give that to her? Would she get one from Rob in that accidental manga esque moment when the fall happens?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So it becomes like a bit trickier and a bit like I don't want to say muddied because that sounds like a negative connotation, but it's not as clear to me which one it is. I guess idealistic,
Yeah.
maybe, because there's some stuff changed and tweaked, and Riley is really cool, and Joe's such an alpha male who gets to lead the Yakuza at such a young age. Like he's just like a college sophomore, and he's the leader of a Yakuza gang, and he's got two women in his life who are awesome hotties. It's like this seems
Yeah.
idealistic. I wish I was Joe. But
Yeah.
what am I off? Do you think?
Well, so the thing
What
with Joe is
what
that
is it?
Joe's actually 24 in Fortunate Events, whereas
Okay.
Riley and Jen are 20. So it's a little bit.
Oh, so
He's
he's
a little
much
bit older.
older.
Yeah.
He's a little bit.
Um.
That's a good point. That's a good
Yeah.
distinction. Yeah. Thank you.
So I actually think it swings between realistic, alternate, and idealistic. Though idealistic
Interesting.
only shows up a few times, like you said, Riley falling on top of Joe so perfectly. But also, I think the bathroom scene at the Italian restaurant, nobody coming in
Sure.
during into the bathroom during that is very idealistic, and being it like Riley being able to kneel on such a hard tile floor for long enough, all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
there's
yeah.
there's some things that
Uh,
there's aspects of it that I think make all three make sense. So I don't have a definitive answer of which one it is, but I think it's perfect. I
yeah,
think that's perfectly fine because it can be a mix of them.
yeah.
So I guess my final question, perhaps the ultimate question for the biggest fan of the story. Why has this story stuck with you for so long, despite there being so little for years?
It's funny. I mean, it's interesting what sticks with you over the years.
Hmm.
I always love that beginning, how clear it was, and how engaging. I think it's because you never fully went away as well. You were always active commenting, and then as we become friends, clearly I have it deep, like at the front of my mind a lot of the time that you're there, your story's there, and I want to see it finished because you're someone who's still around and writing and not
Hmm.
afraid to say like it's something I'll get back to, and then you do and you keep at it And so I think that's a reason too. I think it's because I always wanted to see where Riley's story went,
Hmm.
especially like in later years, before the last break, before the ending. It's like when I realized, like, yeah, this is a character who I suspected I would resonate with, but now I'm connecting with on different levels that I didn't expect, in ways and in emotional sort of avenues I didn't think the story was going to explore, in terms of trauma and filling these holes in more significant ways than just through sexual partners. And we realize she is actually going to change. And then, so I wanted to see her story and how it ended. And I think I've always wanted that since the first hour after you posted it. Think about that. Literally
Yeah.
an hour, like 60
Yeah.
minutes
Yeah.
after you posted it. I was on there. Like, I love this. Keep
Yeah.
writing it
Yep.
from day one. So, hour one. Yeah, and today and to this day,
Yep.
whatever it is now, since you posted the last part, what's that, like 7 years or something? I'd guess we've been
S-
friends since then.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Some friendships don't often last that long,
No.
and this what we have been able to chat about it as writers, as friends. It's brought us together. This story, so it's always gonna have a special place in my heart for that.
Hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah. I feel like it might even be a little easier to maintain friendships in this community because we're here for such a personal and intimate aspect of ourselves.
Mm,
So we already know that we collectively share this super personal interest. So something like that's already out of the way. So really, for a lot of us, it's kind of like our deepest secret. So really, what else is there to worry about? Really being judged
yeah.
on or anything like that.
Yeah. Love that.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. That's definitely clears it up for me then, and I'm very happy to hear that you actually did engage and connect with Riley so much.
Yeah.
It's not something I was expecting, but I wrote it for myself, and I guess being so specific with things and writing things for yourself does tend to end up having a much broader audience than you anticipate.
Totally.
Is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
No, I think we were exhaustive in our discussion of this, which is
Yes.
great. And I'm glad we were able to go deep into your past and life. Hopefully, that didn't make you too uncomfortable,
Not
me
at all.
grilling you about your childhood.
Not at all.
Hopefully, it was kind of therapeutic too. No, I thought it was awesome. I love the story. Super glad we get to chat about it. I just want to know when your next story is coming out.
It'll come out at some point. I have a
Oh,
couple. I have an idea I think I'm going to do for a one-off, and then I actually did start it. I wrote it down in a notebook because my computer was fucking up, and then a while back. But it's one I've
yeah.
really liked, and then I think I'll try and I think I'm gonna finish the next one I do in this universe will be finishing um, the dangerous games we played, and then there's a couple other ideas I have for the universe. Um,
Nice.
and maybe at some point we'll be able to do that story idea I sent you.
Yeah, you
That
have
would be
some
fun.
very exciting ideas.
That'd be
Yeah,
fun.
awesome.
Huh, do you have anything you'd like to promote?
Um, Nefertora and all of his stories and his poetry. I mentioned some of the titles. Should definitely go read Mood Swings. That will wreck you. Go look at all the art he's got commissioned. Sounds like more art's on the way too. Maybe, maybe.
Potentially.
Um,
Potentially.
Plus, yeah, beautiful, beautiful stuff there to read. Um, and all the episodes of this podcast you should definitely go check out
I
all the way.
appreciate I appreciate that, and in the same way, check out everything Hans has done. It's definitely a lot harder to find everything he's done because it's so scattered, and he's done so much.
Yes.
He's such a prolific
Yep.
writer, but
Yeah.
absolutely worth it to check out everything, especially Lucy and Daniela. If you haven't checked that out, why are you listening to this? Check that out right now.
Awesome.
Wow. Well, there you have it. It's another mesmerizing conversation and discussion with Hans Gutherson. Thank you so much for coming on, especially to talk about one of my own works.
So glad to do it. Anytime you want to talk about your stories, invite me back. I'll be here.
Yeah, this it won't become a constant thing. I'll say that, but maybe in the future I'll look at some more of my stuff. So yeah, it's not going. I might sprinkle it in here or there. So if there are any topics, stories, ideas, etc., that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, as Hans does so often, as I've had multiple other guests come on, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as New Fatora. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.